The large farms in southern states used enslaved people to grow their crops. The farm owners depended on slave labor to make their goods more profitable. Slaves were treated as if they were property that could be bought or sold. People held in slavery were not citizens. They could not claim the rights of citizens. Agriculture was profitable in the South because the flat lands were good for farming, and so landowners built plantations for slaves to work on. The North's economy did not depend on slave labor. The North was also a center for shipbuilding and trade with other nations. The economic differences between the North and the South caused a conflict among the framers at the Philadelphia Convention. One area of disagreement was the issue of tariffs. The purpose of a protective tariff is to raise the cost of the imports to protect local farmers and businesses against outside competition. The Northern and Southern delegates held different opinions about tariffs. The Northern states believed that tariffs were necessary for their businesses to prosper. Tariffs on British products would make those products cost more than similar ones made in America. The Southern states had fewer citizens than the Northern states did. Southerners were afraid they would be a minority in Congress. They thought they might have less power in the new national government to decide issues of trade. So, the framers who came from the Southern states opposed giving the national government power to regulate trade. The conflict about slavery was more complicated than the issue of tariffs. Slavery began in the colonies soon after the first settlements were established, but most of the northern states had put an end to the practice, at least officially. Most of the framers from the northern states were opposed to slavery, as were some framers from the southern states. Many southern farmers, however, were still financially dependent on slavery and wanted it to continue. The framers reached a compromise over the issues of tariffs and slavery. They gave Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. To get this agreement from the Southern delegates, the framers from the North agreed to Southern demands on the issues of slavery. The framers reached the following agreements about slavery. The national government would not end the slave trade before 1808. They included the 3/5 clause in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. And finally, the framers agreed to include the fugitive slave clause in Article 4, Section 2. The 3/5 clause states that in deciding how many representatives a state could send to the House of Representatives, the numbers would be determined by counting free persons, indentured servants, and 3/5 of all other persons. Congress was to use the same count for collecting direct taxes from the states. Native Americans were excluded. The Fugitive Slave Clause states that persons who escaped from slavery to a state where slavery was prohibited shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Although the delegates agreed to the compromise, many people in both the North and the South were strongly opposed to slavery. For example, one framer, Gouverneur Morris, denounced slavery as the curse of heaven on the states where it existed. It is also interesting to note that nowhere in the Constitution did the writers use the words slave or slavery. Some people say that this is because framers were ashamed of slavery. The Constitution gave Congress the power to place tariffs on imports. Congress also was given the power to control both interstate and foreign trade. To get this agreement from the Southern delegates, the framers from the North agreed to Southern demands on the issues of slavery. The framers who opposed slavery had to compromise on the issue of slavery so that Congress could have the power to place tariffs on imports and the power to control both foreign and interstate trade. I believe that the compromise did violate the fundamental principles because the slaves should have had just as much representation as free persons did. The compromise should have given equality to all. The North had farmers, fishers, merchants, bankers, and had no slave labor. The North also had shipbuilding and trade with other nations, while the South was almost completely agricultural. They used slaves and sold most of their products to Great Britain and other nations in Europe. The North believed that the tariffs were necessary for their businesses to prosper. The South thought that tariffs would increase the prices on products they brought from European nations. Most northern states put an end to slavery. The southern states were dependent for slavery for their economy and wanted it to continue. The Southerners thought that each state should have the right to decide on slavery.